Welcome to Exploring My Research, Putting into Practice Evolving Design Thinking Methods at Technology Firms that Prioritize User Experience, the Evolution to 2-Hour Design Sprints. I'm Teresa Kane, and before we get started, I'd like to talk a bit about my background. I've been in the product and technology industry for the past 15 years with a focus on product strategy and design thinking methodologies across organizations and startups. I've personally led, coached, or participated in over 70 design sprints, and I've run workshops and spoke at over 15 events in 2022 alone on sprint efficiencies. I'm finishing up my Executive Master of Business Administration at Rutgers University, and I'm also finishing up my Master of Integrated Innovation for Products and Services at Carnegie Mellon University. And you can see a little bit more about my background in education, certifications, awards, and I also have a book coming out here soon called Solving Problems in 2 Hours, How to Brainstorm and Create Solutions with 2-Hour Design Sprints, in which this research was the foundation for that book. So let's talk about the background of what we're talking about today with design sprints. So the research problem that I was really understanding and learning about is that many organizations base their own design thinking and design sprint methods off Stanford's design thinking method or using the 5-day design sprint method from Jake Knapp and the team at Google Ventures from the book Sprint: How to Solve Big Problems and Test New Ideas in Just 5 Days. However, when the COVID-19 pandemic hit and lockdowns really accelerated in March of 2020, design sprints became impossible for most organizations, including the organizations I was working for and with. And really, there was an adaptation to this 5-day method in order to work at many organizations. And so what we're going to be talking about here is a method that I put together on a 2-hour design sprint, of which allowed organizations, including my own, to be able to accelerate this process and be able to adapt to it in a remote environment. It created some efficiencies around being more productive as an organization and the ability to collaborate with multiple stakeholders in a 2-hour process versus 40 hours. If you're not familiar with the difference between design sprints versus design thinking, a design sprint is a problem-solving method inspired by design thinking. So with design thinking, this really relates very similarly to waterfall agile method. So it could take months or years. You're really exploring the problem. You're empathizing, defining, ideating, prototyping, and testing. Whereas a traditional design sprint, which is 5 days, and again created by Jake Knapp and the team at Google Ventures, this time boxed that problem solving and said, let's explore this in 5 days. Understanding the first day, diverging the second day, deciding the third day, prototyping the fourth day, and testing on the 5th day. So some of the challenges I experienced even before the COVID-19 pandemic in implementing 5-day design sprints is that it's really not a one-size-fits-all option for organizations. It's very expensive. So a lot of organizations, when this process rolled out, were hiring third-party consulting firms, and this could cost upwards of $100,000 to really roll this out, depending how big your org was and depending how many design sprints you were committing to. So it really didn't cater well to a self-led moderator without either training from a third party or sending someone from your team to go through extensive training on this process. So it's very expensive, and that doesn't even include the time of getting anywhere from 10 to 50 stakeholders together to be able to run this process for a full 40 hours. That's a very expensive meeting for 40 hours. In addition to that, lack of internal resources or UX team. So UX has really grown in adoption, especially over the last 5 years, and it's expected to continue to grow. And with that, being able to not have any team members to be able to work on design sprints is challenging. In the 5-day design sprint method, that's why it really catered to bringing in those external parties. So this 2-hour design sprint method that I explored and that we're going to be talking about really allows the focus to be on any subject matter expert or anyone from your organization to be able to come in and run this 2-hour design sprint successfully. It's also not as friendly for remote collaboration. So a 5-day design sprint remote, while it is possible, is very challenging, especially if you have a global team across the world that is really coming together to solve a problem. It makes it very challenging. I personally have offices in Australia, the UK, in addition to the US, actually Dubai also. So this makes it very challenging to get a group of stakeholders together, let alone for 2 hours versus 40 hours. It's impossible. Um, and then loss of productive time from the team. You really should be including engineers and other key stakeholders in these design sprints. And when you do that, that really is pulling them away from what they're able to work on, especially if you're on an agile sprint method and a sprint cycle and you're maybe delivering code every 1, 2, 3, or 4 weeks. This is going to take away from that productive time from the team. And ultimately, even after a 5-day design sprint, and I've had this happen multiple times, additional design sprints are still needed. So you're not really solving everything in the 40 hours sometimes. So if you're not familiar with a 5-day design sprint schedule, this is actually a schedule from one of the last 5-day design sprints I ran, and one stage is completed per day. And you'll take a look. I don't expect you to read all the text that's on the screen, but what I want you to understand is the amount of complexity and schedule within this 5 days. So this is a very intense 5 days. If you've not participated in one or ran one, it is very time consuming. It's tiring. And you often have stakeholders trying to break away during it, even though it's recommended they're there for the whole time period. So this is just to give you an idea of what that 5-day design sprint schedule looks like. And again, this is a modified schedule. You could look at many traditional 5-day design sprint schedules from looking that up on google.com or just reading the book by Jake Knapp and the team at Google Ventures on Sprint. So what's a method that I was able to come up with to help kind of solve the situation that was going on of it being challenging to conduct 5-day design sprints? So my hypothesis was, the exponential growth of self-service technology apps, websites, and products really created the demand to utilize shorter design sprint methods to deliver features faster to customers while in a remote or hybrid working environment. Essentially, when the COVID-19 pandemic happened, while there was a remote workforce and that was growing, it really accelerated that growth, and it accelerated the need to really explore faster, more adaptive methods than a 5-day design sprint. And if you're not familiar with the entire history of design thinking and design sprints, it really starts back, to the 1970s, probably even earlier, on the concept of visual thinking. So there were books on design, such as Experiences in Visual Thinking by Robert McKim. Design thinking and visual thinking were later popularized by IDEO and Stanford's Design School. And then again, we've talked a little bit about the book Sprint by Jake Knapp and the team at Google Ventures. And ultimately, when that book came out in 2016, again, this was a couple years, before there were really any full-on remote hybrid organizations. They were certainly there, but not as much as when the COVID-19 pandemic hit. But you'll notice I have 2018 on here because even before the COVID-19 pandemic hit, I began adapting the method of 5-day design sprints down to a handful of days. So 2 days, 3 days, even down to 1 day. Ultimately, the COVID-19 pandemic allowed me to further adapt this process down to a couple hours. And again, as this is an adaptive method, other organizations around the world were doing this too. So I'm talking a bit about what worked really well for the method that I put together and why it was so successful. And I hope this method is something that you could explore and use at your organization as well. So in the creation of this hybrid method, I really took the best of both worlds from both design thinking and design sprints. I broke this into a 5-stage a 5-stage design sprint, with the first 3 stages being conducted during the 2-hour design sprint. So stage 1, empathizing with customers. Stage 2, exploring the problem. Stage 3, ideating solutions. Those are all conducted during that 120-minute session. And then after the 2-hour design sprint is when you have your prototyping solutions and testing with customers. And we'll talk a bit about why that's so successful and so important to have that outside of that 2-hour design sprint cycle. So the opportunity here is that 2-hour design sprints create more opportunities for success by increasing the frequency and speed of problems organizations can solve. So ultimately, when conducting this method, I wasn't really just looking at reducing time spent for my product and UX team, but also how could we solve more problems in a week, in a month, in a year. Traditionally, when we would bring in the concept of design sprints, we wouldn't really do more than 5 in a year. In the 2-hour design sprint method that I'll talk a little bit more about further on the results, we are conducting over 20 2-hour design sprints per year now. So increasing that frequency and speed of problems we're solving as an organization, and the frequency and speed of problems I'm helping other organizations solve as well by teaching this process. So you'll recall the 5-day design sprint schedule we looked at a couple slides back. So this is the 2-hour design sprint method of the condensed schedule. So with that, again, 3 stages are completed in a 120-minute session, and this is all time boxed, and that's really part of the success with that. And in addition to that, traditional design sprints are done in person, and this method allowed me to explore this virtually. So in addition, I was using and have used Zoom as well as Figma FigJam, which if you go out to the Figma FigJam site and look up the template 2-hour design sprints, you'll kind of be able to see the template used a little bit more. Since we're talking about the methods, we won't be going into the visual tools much, but that really does contribute to the success of why this is able to be conducted in those 2 hours. So in this first stage, you're really focusing on empathizing with customers. This is where you're really defining the problem statement. You're understanding the needs and observations of your customers. The second stage, exploring the problem. This is where you conduct the how might we exercise, or HMW. And as a team, you are agreeing and voting on the top 3 explorations that you think are going to solve the problem for your users. And ultimately, if you're not using user personas today, this is where you would be able to update any user personas or add any user personas as a team to talk about who you are solving the problem for. And last but not least, ideating solutions, of which this is my favorite stage in everyone is an artist and everyone becomes an artist during the stage in really exploring the sketching exercise. So this is where every stakeholder is able to explore the solution that they feel is going to solve the problem through a visual tool. So they could do this on paper, Figma FigJam, Balsamiq, Word, PowerPoint, anything that they feel comfortable that they'd be able to share and present their designs to be able to share the value they think their solution is going to add. So I talked a bit about earlier, prototyping and testing are completed outside of the 2 hours. And I'll tell a bit about why this worked so successfully. So there are some challenges in really having prototyping and testing during a design sprint, not let alone a 2-hour design sprint, other than time constraints. So prototyping a solution, a really forced solution in 3 days and trying to get it in front of clients isn't always feasible for every organization. And there have been many design sprints, many 5-day and multi-day design sprints where myself and the designer were up till late hours really trying to put this prototype together for the next day, only to have users not show up the next day, or perhaps they've sent someone else from the organization to show up, and then you're really testing the wrong persona. So by taking prototyping and testing outside of that 2-hour design sprint window, you're able to really gain that focus. You could spend as little time as you want or as much time as you want on that solution, and you're able to bring that in front of the right users and testing that as quickly as possible. And maybe you're testing different times throughout the day instead of forcing everything in one full day with that. So that really has been successful and is a big key differentiator of a 5-day design sprint. What also is a key differentiator is if you as a group decide that, you know what, this problem and solution that we've come up with isn't the right one, maybe you decide not to bring it into prototyping and testing. Where in a 5-day design sprint, you bring it in there anyways, and you're wasting potentially an additional 2 days of time when you know as a group that's probably not going to be the solution that you wanted. And even more so, with traditional 5-day design sprints, there's additional prototyping and testing needed no matter what after that 5-day design sprint. So you're always going to need more with that. So now let's talk about the results from running the 2-hour design sprint method. So some of the benefits learned and findings from running a 2-hour design sprint with this method versus a 5-day design sprint are, I was able to save time from traditional methods. So this is an obvious one, spending 2 hours versus 40 hours. This is also inclusive of setup time as well. So what's not talked about with the 5-day design sprint method is the amount of setup and cleanup and really processing that data. So in a traditional 5-day design sprint, you have, I use Post-it notes a lot in my day still, but in a 5-day design sprint, you're using a lot of sticky notes. And with the 2-hour design sprint method, you're using virtual sticky notes in a Figma FigJam template. So in itself, not only are you saving time conducting that full 40 hours there, but you're saving what's likely, around 8 to 10 hours before and 8 to 10 hours after of really setting up, cleaning up, and then putting that data together to send out to the team, of which in a 2-hour design sprint method using Figma FigJam, you're able to have everything in one place in a virtual whiteboard. It's less expensive than conducting a 5-day design sprint. So we talked a bit about not just the expense of not bringing in a third-party consulting firm, but getting time from, let's say, 20 stakeholders for 2 hours is significantly less expensive than for 40 hours. And it's as productive. You're able to come together during that 2 hours with a solution that would ultimately most likely be the same solution that you would have gotten out of the 5-day design sprint, but in a shorter amount of time. It's easier to schedule with stakeholders quickly. When running 5-day design sprint methods, it would take 3 to 6 months to really get that group of stakeholders together, as well as planning it from a budget standpoint and a release standpoint with different features in that cycle. With the 2-hour design sprint, it doesn't impact your sprint that much. So you're able to really bring in engineers, bring in anyone that's talking to the user, schedule it with the designers to be able to work it in and get everything done within that time period of a 2-hour design sprint method versus a 5-day design sprint. This then allows you to conduct multiple design sprints in a week or month versus just a handful of 5-day design sprints in a year. And we should be constantly innovating as organizations and bringing in new thoughts and ideas to solving problems. So this is going to allow you to solve more problems and be more efficient as an organization. And last but not least, everyone can be 100% remote and all over the globe. This is really critical because in a time of post-COVID pandemic era, many organizations are still remote or hybrid. I'm currently in a hybrid model at the moment. And so this is going to allow you to reach more of your stakeholders within your organization. So one of the modifications learned from conducting the 2-hour design sprint method is it really works best for small and medium problems as a complementary method to conducting 5-day design sprints for large problems or in using design thinking for complex problems. So this is really in conducting a number of these shorter design sprint methods over the years, really focusing in on small and medium problems works the best for the 2-hour design sprint. So let's talk about the implementation of 2-hour design sprints. Implementing 2-hour design sprints within my product, UX, and design teams really has resulted in a lot of success. So since 2020, and this is March 2020, over 50 2-hour design sprints have been completed since then at our organization. And so this is really powerful. And again, this is just a result from what was done at our organization. So this doesn't include the number of design sprints completed outside of that through all of the workshops and trainings I've done since then as well, which we'll talk about in the next step. But ultimately, this is where I learned 2-hour design sprints cater well to small, medium problems and remote teams. And if used for a large problem, really, ultimately, you are conducting multiple 2-hour design sprints, which 3 2-hour design sprints is still going to save time over one 5-day design sprint. So you can have a lot of success in really taking this method and trying it out for any different size of problems. And then last but not least, virtual whiteboard tools like Figma, FigJam, and Zoom really allowed for easy adoption of this method, especially in a remote or hybrid environment, as everyone's able to collaborate online. Also using Zoom, I also use Teams, WebEx. I've used a number of different visual collaborative tools as well. So you're able to really use these video conferencing tools as well. So you're able to use both virtual whiteboard and video conferencing tool to be able to reach a broader stakeholder group for that. In terms of the feedback from conferences and workshops, I've had the opportunity to teach this method at conferences and workshops across the globe for the past couple of years as well, and really testing out this research to see if it would apply outside of my organization. And ultimately, what I learned is the 2-hour design sprint process was accepted and of interest to the product and UX and design community around the globe. And I think the biggest driver is saving time and being able to solve problems faster. So I've had the opportunity to train and present this method at 8 product and UX conferences in 2022 and in front of a combination of more than 5,000 attendees across those conferences with really positive feedback and follow-up. I also had the opportunity to conduct 5 workshops on how to conduct 2-hour design sprints with over 200 product managers, designers, and UX researchers from several high-profile organizations around the world that were able to bring this back to their organization and conduct the 2-hour design sprint method as well. And much of what I learned from this really allowed me to create additional on-demand training and is the foundation for the book I created, which I'll talk just very shortly about at the very end. So it's been really successful, but I think it's still a learning opportunity as I'm still learning and understanding how this is being applied to other organizations and whether every organization has the same amount of success as I've been able to have with this process and my teams. So in conclusion, 2-hour design sprints are successful. They can be successful. You should give them a try. But when should you use a 5-day versus a 2-hour design sprint? So with 5-day design sprints, these are really fantastic for solving large problems. You have the flexibility to schedule 1, 3, 6 months out, and not every stakeholder may be able to attend the design sprint. With 2-hour design sprints, small and medium problems work really well for these 2-hour design sprints. You need to schedule it within 1 to 2 weeks. Maybe you need to get it released very quickly to clients, and you need that really fast iteration. And you need participation from all stakeholders. So I hope you've enjoyed a little bit about the research I've been doing on a 2-hour design sprint method in place of a 5-day design sprint method. If you'd like to learn more about this process, I invite you to participate in my online training on udemy.com. 2-hour design sprints, learn how to solve problems and design products in just 2 hours versus 5 days using Figma FigJam. Or I invite you in the new book I have coming out here soon, Solving Problems in 2 Hours, How to Brainstorm and Create Solutions with 2-hour design sprints. I hope you've enjoyed today's session, and I look forward to staying connected. Thank you.